At CPAC, former President Trump was asked what he would do differently to address what he says is a rise in violent crime. Let's take a look.
Let's start with crime, right? These are the numbers right now. 2020, this is from the FBI. Murders are up 24%, almost 25%. What would you do to address the skyrocketing crime that's going on? Many of these crimes are happening in local communities.
Yep.
So what is the agenda on that issue specifically?
So as I've heard you say, all Democrat states, if you look at, as an example, Chicago, Illinois is very bad, but Chicago, take a look at the numbers. They had 260 people shot on 4th of July weekend. New York, through the roof. No more cash bail, no more anything. All they do is go after Republicans. Take a look at Los Angeles, what's going on in Los Angeles with the crime, and Oakland and Baltimore. What you have to do is you have to give the police back their authority. Now, some people say, oh, that's a terrible thing. What's terrible is in Chicago, you have 200, think of it, 260 people were shot 260 people. In Afghanistan, you don't have 260 people shot.
Yeah, the rise in homicides in particular is very troubling. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also chimed in.
The reason you have huge spikes in crime in many parts of the country is because of not standing up for law enforcement, having weak policies where you let people out and you're not prosecuting people who are committing habitual offenses. That is clearly causing disastrous consequences. And actually what they will do in some of these jurisdictions, they will say, oh, well, arrests are down for whatever, over a year because they're not arresting anybody.
As we've discussed here, the status of crime in the country is a little more complex than it seems. Here's a handy video from Recount that outlines some of the intricacies.
Recently, you've probably heard a lot of this.
Crime is surging across the country.
A crime surge.
Summer of crime surge.
What you might not have heard, it's not technically true. Crime has been decreasing in the United States for decades, and the most common types of crime, robberies and larceny, continued that downward trend in 2020. Even the overall violent crime rate decreased last year. Here's what is increasing though: specific types of violent crime, muggings, aggravated assaults, and especially murder. Preliminary data, which could change when the final numbers come in September, showed the murder rate increased nationwide by 25% in 2020, the biggest increase since we started collecting formal crime statistics in the 1960s.
Man, the biggest increase since those statistics started to be collected in 1 year. So we've been tracking public opinion on crime, and from previous Hill-HarrisX data, we know almost 1/4 said crime in their communities has gotten worse, and about half of voters feel confident President Biden can handle the surge of homicides in cities. But how do voters feel about police presence in their area? We have some new data on that.
We recognize that we have to come together to fulfill the first responsibility of democracy, and to keep each other safe. And that's what the American people are looking for when it comes to reducing violent crime and gun violence. And I think this group is illustrative of what we need to get put together. Secondly, is supporting local law enforcement with federal support they need. Our strategy provides including funding for law enforcement through the American Rescue Plan for states, cities, and to be able to hire police and pay them overtime in order to advance community policing.
Roughly 1/3 of voters said they noticed an increase in crime in their communities, and that's the same for all demographics. When it comes to policing, 44% said they want more police in their community, 7% said less, and 50% said the same amount. Emily, what's your take?
Well, I think that 7% saying that they want less police in their area shows how out of touch the elite discourse was over the course of the last year. There's so much more nuance to this conversation than is done justice to by hashtags like defund the police, which actually in some cases are the catch-all term for movements that have nuanced positions on what to do with the police. I think there is a segment of the far left, and you can speak to this, that would love to see the police defunded on a local basis. I think that's absolutely true, but I also think there are proposals that it would serve us all better to sort of argue directly against the nuance and the details of what you want to do with the police. Do you want to just sort of strip them of funding in certain areas? Do you want to retool them to be more of a community police force? How are you going to do that? What do you want to do? That's so much more interesting. But that 7% number, to me, that's pretty clearly shows how bad a job the legacy media did of having this conversation when the country needed to have it over the last year.
Well, and the question would have been different when asked at the height of that, at the height of the protests as well. But also, if you ask the question, should some funding for police be diverted towards social services? You get these huge numbers of people saying in the affirmative that it absolutely it should. So, it's not quite as simple as all that. And I hope that this at least causes us to start rethinking policing. Is it necessary to have armed police patrols doing traffic work, for instance? Like what? If those are the encounters that are leading to so many police-involved shootings, as they euphemistically call it. Then, why can't we think of traffic enforcement in the same way that we think of parking enforcement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, let's take a closer look at some of the crosstabs because they give us more insight into how people responded. Younger voters are more likely than older voters to say they want less police activity in their community, along with Black and Hispanic voters, as well as Democrats and rural voters. However, among all of these demographics, more voters say they want more police or about the same amount versus less police in their community. Ryan, based on what you were just talking about, what do you think of these crosstabs?
Yeah, it is a rebuke to the kind of the blunt idea that there is a kind of mass movement for less policing in neighborhoods. That you don't see a very big number there, and it's very unusual to see across party lines to see that same number. But beneath that, you do have much more complicated questions about policing. If you ask somebody, when you dial 911, do you want police to be able to come and respond? Then 100% of people say yes. That's a different question than do you support all of these different varieties of police practices that are currently underway.
I actually think even to get really specific, these numbers to me are a great window into exactly how Twitter is destroying the political discourse in this country, because this is a much more productive conversation when you sort of look into what people want and directionally understand where people are looking for change, particularly. And then you realize that we got sucked into the stupid hashtag debate over the course of the last year about defund the police, when there's such a small segment of the population, even among social justice advocates, that want to just universally defund the police, but both sides got sucked into this ridiculous conversation where you're spending 70% of the time debating a straw man in the arena, the media arena, which is our primary sort of public square for hashing these important questions out. And it did such a disservice to people. And there were a lot of policy changes made when it comes to police on the local level around the country. Actually, Democrats had a lot of success implementing and passing police reforms around the country over the last year, and maybe a little beyond that as well, earlier than that. But it's incredible how much time we waste on these straw men that are driven by the simplicity and reductive incentives on Twitter.
So on Monday, Biden met with mayors from across the country and urged them to use coronavirus relief funding to address the rise in violent crime, specifically targeting gun violence. New York mayoral winner Eric Adams was among the group. Adams ran a tough on crime campaign, signaling the party might be leaning into that messaging heading into 2022. Eric Adams's victory is being used by people who want to push this narrative and push this agenda. That race was obviously a lot more complicated than that. The left kind of took out most of its viable candidates, and Eric Adams was sort of a last man standing. So it's hard to see that exactly as a resounding endorsement. While at the exact same time that Adams was winning the mayoral election, you had a DA candidate running on a kind of progressive criminal justice message beat the candidate that was running to his right. And in Philadelphia, everybody predicted that the kind of radical defense attorney, Larry Krasner, would be thrown out of office because everybody was upset about the rise in crime. Larry Krasner won re-election resoundingly.
Yeah, I do think there's something National Democrats can glean from Adams' victory in that it wasn't a non-starter for him. Sort of his background and his position on these things was not a non-starter for him. I do think that's something National Democrats should internalize. On the other hand, I think, often when these local issues are blown up into major national stories and nationalized in a way that, kind of smooths out the nuance that happens on a local level, you're absolutely right. That happens all the time, and this is definitely one of those examples. Still, this sort of, if Democrats take that and say we're going to be tough on crime, I think from a political perspective, it can be helpful because it depends on what they're talking about in terms of tough on crime. I think there is an appetite around the country to see toughness on crime, but that also means that you have to be sort of targeted in what you're saying when you say you want to be tough on crime. What does that actually look like? I can see that working for Democrats. I think it would be a sort of different version, certainly, from what you hear from Republicans when they talk about being tough on crime. But I do think there are a lot of people around the country that want to see that, and that is a bipartisan appetite. So I think if Democrats are smart enough to tap into it, it'll be the important step is, what does it mean to be tough on crime? What does that actually look like?
The last time Democrats got tough on crime, they took the prison population from under 500,000 to over 2 million. And if you're starting at over 2 million and you launch into another tough on crime, 4, 6, what kind of numbers are too many for those politicians?
Absolutely. There's definitely not an appetite to throw more people in prison, and that's absolutely true. I think that's bipartisan, and so Democrats have to be careful with this, and we'll see where it goes.
I think that's really well said. So tomorrow on Rising, Brianna Joy Gray is here. Plus, we get an economic update from Washington Post White House economics reporter Jeff Stein.
In the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you're always notified about our new content. On that note, we'll see you tomorrow, and we hope you have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon.
See you guys soon.